I'm about to share a poem with you entitled Free Your Mind to Write. I wrote this poem on July 4th, 1994. I started writing it at 8:07 p.m. and finished it at 10:51 p.m. So for me to have written a poem of this length in that time frame, it was something that was bubbling out of me like flowing rivers of water. This poem, of course, is copyright, so don't bite or I'll sue your butt with all my might. Anyway, this poem is actually a fallout of a poem I wrote entitled Jehovah is My Friend, which I will link in the description box below after I put the video for that out. I haven't gotten to it yet. And I will cross-link on that video to this poem so that you can get the connection. What had happened was I shared the poem Jehovah is My Friend with my pastor's wife. This was the church I was a member of from, I think, 1987 to 2003. I don't know, it was about 14 years. Church in Queens before I came to Perfected Faith Church. But anyway, my pastor preached my poem on a Mother's Day. And so this is the result of that. I sat in the congregation and I'm telling you, I was so young then, but if I could have had hot flashes, I would have had hot flashes. I thank God for the self-control I had even at that time, because if I didn't have what God gave me, I'm telling you, I might have jumped up out of my seat and run up on the pulpit. I don't know. But at first, you know, when I heard the words he was saying, I was like, wait a minute, you know, it was sounding too familiar until he quoted one particular line in the poem that confirmed for me that I was not going crazy. This guy was preaching my poem. It was the verse he said was, we need rest at night, and the nighttime was made for sleeping. And I was like, that was the eye opener for me. I mean, it was a really big shock for me. I was really hurt. I felt paranoid, like he was, you know, talking to me. But you know, after a while, I had to come to grips. You know, there were so many people in the congregation, and he couldn't possibly be talking to just me. And then after a while, I noticed that everybody was like, "Oh, amen, hallelujah," and the Spirit of God moved. And so, you know, God kind of showed me on that day that, yeah, I was used. I asked God to use me. But, you know, when you ask God to use you, be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. And you just might not get it the way you think you should get it. God used me, but God used him to use me. I don't know. I just felt used, but it wasn't in a good way at first. I admit, I was pissed. I was burnt. I was hot. I was heated. I was livid. But then when I saw in the end that souls had been saved, souls were moved by the word, between his sermon and my poem, God used them both. And, you know, he caused some people's lives to be changed, you know. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go into the poem. Hope you enjoy it. The thoughts in my head were so rapidly twirling that they started making knots that needed unfurling. I was sitting on my bed when it happened this time, when that little voice said, "Monique, just free your mind." I knew this was a big one, and there was no use in fighting, because the words began flowing before I started writing. Doing this one was something that I had not planned, but now there's paper in my lap and a pen in my hand. Oh yes, this is serious. I tell you no lie. I just can't shake this feeling and I can't explain why. The pen in my hand would be unconsciously twirled, and soon I'm deep within my own little world. My kitty cat is causing a mild distraction. Suddenly she's so wild, energetic, and full of action. But soon I won't notice that she's even around, 'cause my mind will tune out most outside sound. My eyes are open, but I won't notice very much from my seat, unless she jumps into my lap or runs over my feet. Well, that's enough chatter about my little kitty. Now it's time to get down to the real nitty-gritty. First, I need to address this so-called gift, this talent I use whenever I need a lift. Yes, when freed, I can smile instead of just frown, but people can make them like burdens that weigh me down. For example, one poem I shared with my pastor's wife, and that poem had to do with my personal life. I didn't think I should have told her to keep it secret till my pastor preached my poem from community's pulpit. Yes, that Sunday, as he preached to the congregation, I felt like my life was displayed to the entire nation. I can give you an idea of just what I heard when Rev stood up to preach from God's holy word. We all laughed because he said this hilariously: "I'm schizophrenic today, and I am preaching to me. From the 23rd Psalm, he maketh me to lie down." But when he started to preach, I felt like a clown. I'm glad I copyright all of my work. Otherwise, I would have felt like a jerk. First, I just thought it was a coincidence. He used lots of my words, but I just couldn't make sense. Till he said, "We need rest, and the nighttime was made for sleeping." Then it crashed into place, and my mind started freaking. All at once, about 20 thoughts zipped through my head. I caught the meaning in the message of the words that he said. Yes, I felt betrayed. I was hurt and a little confused, but mostly I felt that I have been used. In my big purple-white hat on that Mother's Day, I was losing control, so I just started to pray. I calmed down with an attitude that seemed to be fitting. Then he pointed his finger to where I was sitting. I didn't get angry and needed no correction, 'cause many people were sitting in the same direction. I admit that at first I felt paranoid, and that was a feeling I had to avoid. I realized no one knew he might be preaching at me, except one other person, which was Reverend Shirley. But then something I noticed made me think twice. When I put two and two together, I felt sort of nice. That realization made me feel like lost in space, and God slapped a great big smile on my face. I noticed that the congregation was hot, and the sermon put nearly everyone on the spot. People waved their hands, and there were many amens, and I marveled as God's Spirit swept over me and my friends. Between my little poem and the sermon Rev preached, every soul in the sanctuary had surely been reached. I still felt used, but didn't take it so hard, 'cause I was used by the man who was used by God. I asked God to forgive me for how my mind behaved, because at the end of the service, a lost soul had been saved. That person walked down the aisle from the seat they were in and walked straight into God's arms and away from past sin. So on Mother's Day, God taught me an unforgettable lesson. Lots of people can relate to one person's confession. Jehovah is my friend stands out in my mind because I know that he will be until the end of time. The end.